It's November 2nd, 2016, and one of the craziest, most memorable games in baseball history is being played in front of all our eyes. I mean, just insane. The Indians rally for 3 runs with 2 outs, capped off by Rajai Davis's iconic game-tying shot. The crowd's going nuts. Cubs fans are bracing for yet another heartbreak. The game goes to extra innings. A little rain delay takes place. Nobody can breathe. And then the Cubs put up 2 in the 10th. They're 3 outs away, and when Chris Bryant completed the 5-3 putout to end the World Series and finally put the Cubs on top, Cubs fans everywhere could breathe. And a lot more than just that, celebrate like they never have before. Just like that, Theo Epstein's prophecy came true. 5 years earlier, he'd come into Chicago with a 5-year plan to rebuild the Cubs back to the promised land. I mean, this is the same guy who helped the Red Sox break their 86-year curse, and now he comes into Chicago in 2011 with a 5-year plan and probably has that 5-year plan work perfectly, literally, as the Cubs win their first championship since before the Titanic was even built. 1908. I mean, we're talking 4 whole years before Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet began and ended their love story within the matter of days. And 108 years later, within a matter of now a few years, Theo Epstein built not only just a 2016 championship Cubs team, but what also now looked to be a dynasty. They were great, they were young, they were hungry. This was just the beginning. Yet, despite all of that being the case, not only did they end up being arguably the most disappointing failed dynasty of all time, but what's even more shocking is how quickly and suddenly it ended. I thought this would be a little interesting thing to dive into. Really quick as always, if you're part of the 53% of viewers not subscribed yet, go ahead and hit that button if you enjoy the videos, as the Houston Astros have grown as one of the more dominant, I would call dynasties, or at the very least runs of all time. After they won in 2017, we all saw that team winning for a long time because they were talented, young. It just seemed like a consistent winner was forming in front of us, and well, they went on to play in the ALCS every single year after that up until 2024, and have made the playoffs every year since. From 2017 through 2023, they made the ALCS every single year. And even when losing some of their guys from the early years, like Garrett Cole, George Springer, Carlos Correa, they turn around and win it all in 2022 anyway, with still a top offense, pitching staff, etc. You could argue the overall Astros run from 2017 through 2024 was a disappointment in terms of maybe championships, because they won 2, which is good, but only one of them is one people will fully accept. They choked away another championship in 2019, etc. But the bottom line is the Astros didn't stop winning after 2017. And after winning it all in 2016, the way we looked at the Cubs was basically exactly how we've looked at Houston. 2016 was so dominant, ending off with the magical 3-1 comeback and crazy Game 7. And what we thought to be originally true looked to be true, and they only continued that dominance in 2017. The Cubs didn't win quite as many games in 2017, but they were still division winners. Chris Bryant followed up his MVP season with just as good of a year. Anthony Rizzo kept mashing, same with Wilson Contreras, although despite being a catcher who throws out base runners, he himself got caught more than quadruple texting in the DMs of Mia Khalifa before his agency came out saying he was hacked. Well, at least base runners now realize if they get thrown out by Contreras on the bases, they can just say they were hacked and the umpire will call them safe. Good to know. Now, but overall, the Cubs offense was good. The starting pitching was solid. Not nearly as dominant as the year before, but good. But they actually had a better bullpen than the year before, so I guess it evens out. So the Cubs are good, back in the postseason as expected, and this time taking out the 97-win Washington Nationals, beating them in 5 games. Up next, the Dodgers for an NLCS rematch, who ended up taking good care of the Cubs this time. But this made sense. The Dodgers hadn't been to a World Series in a while. They were bound to finally get there, where they eventually would get the worst end of the beginning of the Astros dynasty I just talked about. But yeah, the Cubs never looked like the better team in this series. But hey, they won it all in 2016, so this wasn't too hard to swallow, especially since nothing changed to start out 2018. The offense was good, but Javier Baez took an extra step, smacking 34 home runs, 40 doubles, driving in the most runs in the National League. He was great. The pitching was really good, and the Cubs looked to be on their way to their 3rd straight division title, up 5 games on the Brewers with 26 to play, which isn't that massive of a lead. God, I already hear the comments. Massive, you say? Where did that meme even come from? Can someone please explain? Anyway. But yeah, the Brewers were good and looking to be at least a wild card team, and the Cubs losing 4 out of the 6 games against Milwaukee definitely didn't help with their quest of winning the division. The Brewers stayed hot, so hot, to the point that after the season was over, the division wasn't decided. They caught all the way up, tying the Cubs for a win, so 162 games wasn't going to be enough to decide this. We were going to have to do a game 163. And since the Cubs won the season series, they'd get home field advantage. So it was interesting. Whoever won this game would win the division and celebrate, while whoever loses would play the Rockies at home for a wild card game. And the winner of that game would play whoever won this game. So because the game was being played at Wrigley, the Cubs got to take this, right? I mean, overall, they're still the better team in the middle of what could be a dynasty. Christian Yelich makes it 1-0 Brewers, but when Anthony Rizzo hammered one into the bleachers to tie it, you're thinking, here come the Cubs. This is it. They're going to get it done and take the division they had for 99% of the regular season. But no, in shocking fashion, not only did the Brewers rally for a couple runs and keep the Cubs offense quiet, but to completely turn things around from the norm, Brewers fans kind of took over Wrigley Field, which is the polar opposite of how this usually went. Typically, Cubs fans would take over games in Milwaukee. And I mean, when the Cubs were a playoff team playing non-playoff Brewer teams in 2015 through 2017, that made sense. But now, not only did Brewers fans want to support at home, but they even drove down to Chicago in droves to do a takeover for this game, shockingly snatching the division title from the Cubs in Chicago, while the Cubs now had to get ready for a one-game wild card. Now, there was still a chance this wasn't over between these two teams, because if the Cubs won their wild card game against the Rockies, which would also take place at Wrigley, they'd be headed to Milwaukee for the NLDS. So it sucked to be in the position they were in compared to the Brewers, but all they had to do was win this one game, take care of business, and go avenge yourselves against Milwaukee. But little did any Cubs fan or any baseball fan anywhere knew, this promising Cubs team was about to fall apart just 2 years after what was expected to be the first of several championships. The Rockies were funny enough in the same exact spot the Cubs were, except they were the more expected outcome. There were 2 division tie-breaking games in 2018, which is very rare to happen, and they don't even do tie-breaking games anymore. They just do a tiebreaker based off head-to-head record. But at this point, even when they did tie-breaking games, this was rare to have even one, let alone 2. So there was the one I just went over between the Cubs and Brewers, but also the Dodgers and Rockies. The Brewers upsetting the Cubs on the road was more unexpected, where the Dodgers beating the Rockies in LA wasn't. But either way, this was a unique wildcard game between the two teams who just had their chance at a division win snatched. So in come the Rockies for their second straight wildcard game. In 2017, they went to Arizona and lost in a shootout. The final score was 11-8. Archie Bradley, a pitcher, gave up 2 home runs but hit a 2-run triple at one point himself. It was a wild scene. But this game had a much different tone to it. The Rockies immediately kicked off the scoring with a sac fly in the top of the first, but after that, silence from both sides for the next 8 innings. Just dominant pitching from both lefties, Kyle Freeland and John Lester. Lester you can expect this from. This is far from his first rodeo. Dude, 8 playoff games for breakfast. But Kyle Freeland, the 25-year-old in his first playoff game, was also great. And little fun fact on Lester and Freeland, that ended up being Lester's final ever postseason game. And like I just said, it was Freeland's first postseason game. That's the last he's ever played. And maybe he'll play one again soon, but as long as he stays with the Rockies, that doesn't seem very realistic. As for Lester, though, as great as he was, I mean, the Rockies were able to scratch a run right away. So if both teams didn't do a thing the rest of the way, the Cubs are losing this game. They got to get their shit together. And with 2 outs, nobody on, still down 1-0 in the 8th inning, things were looking bleak until the Cubs worked some magic. Anthony Rizzo would single, get replaced by Terrence Gore, the man teams employ solely for the purpose of running, who'd steal second and fittingly get driven in by the team's best player that year, Javi Baez, who finished second in MVP voting. So the game is tied, Cubs fans are back having faith, and for the next 4 innings, it was just a game of who blinks next, because whoever blinked next would likely also be the last time either side blinked. Offense was just almost impossible to come by. Skip ahead to the 11th, the Cubs have 2 men on with just 1 out. This could be it. Wilson Contreras hits a grounder, but because he's hacked, it went right into the glove of Arenado, who would immediately face a frozen Baez on his way to third, but no more, as he was now of course out, but not before a little hug between the two, which felt so fitting for this game and for where this game was. Both these teams were in similar positions like I explained heading into it. Barely any scoring has been happening in this game. Basically, everyone's been holding their breath anxiously for 11 innings, so a moment like this, I feel like gave everyone the quick laugh and deep breath they all needed. The inning ended 1 batter later, onto the 12th we go, where things would remain at 1-1. Both offenses went 3 and out, so we head to the 13th, and this is where someone finally blinked. Just like how the Cubs rally in the 8th started after the first 2 hitters got out, same thing happened here in the 13th inning, but for the Rockies now. But 2 straight singles by Gerardo Parra and Trevor Story would put runners on the corners, and up comes Tony Walters. Remember when I said Terrence Gore exists on the Cubs or any team he's employed by solely to run? Well, Walters was a man who existed on this Rockies team purely to catch. He is not a hitter. I mean, he goes up to the plate and swings a bat, but he's rarely successful in hitting the ball. But again, he's just there to be a catcher. He's not expected to do anything crazy with the bat. So, of course, in obvious classic baseball fashion, it's Tony Walters, the worst hitter on the team, who drives in the go-ahead run in the 13th inning, all of a sudden putting the Rockies just 3 outs away from advancing and sending the Cubs home, and that's exactly what happened. 3 Cubs come up to bat in the bottom of the 13th and all strike out. Rockies move on, and the Cubs, after failing to win the one-game tiebreaker against the Brewers, they fail to win the wildcard game against Colorado and are now out entirely. And in the moment, it still felt like the Cubs weren't done, that they could still be good for years to come. I mean, they still have the same core that won a championship. Javier Baez just took an extra step in his career. Ian Happ was a new rising potential star. Things look bright, except they never really were. The Cubs have gone on to only make the playoffs a single time since 2018, and it was in 2020 where they got swept in the wild card series against the Marlins in front of a whopping 0 people after a 60-game season. You can't really even count that. 2019 was disappointing. They won just 84 games and finished in 3rd place in the NL Central, missing the postseason for the first time in 5 years. The core players were all still good. The offense overall was really good. The pitching was not. 2020 was 2020, and then 2021 was the official end. At this point, the Cubs were already dead. That what we all figured would be a dynasty, that was over. But it was officially official when they traded away the key characters of the 2016 ring: Chris Bryant, Anthony Rizzo, and also Javier Baez. The team finished with over 90 losses, didn't get really any better in 2022. Wilson Contreras then left for St. Louis, and for the last couple of years, the Cubs have been a non-playoff team disguised as a competing one. Now, first off, what's interesting is, yeah, it did suck to see all those legendary Cubs get traded away, the ones who are a part of that historic team, but when you see how all those players have since aged with their new teams and the new contracts they got with those teams, it's an interesting scenario where neither side aged well. Like, the players who are traded haven't aged well, so it's not like the Cubs necessarily miss them, but it's also not like the Cubs have aged well because they traded them. So, like, it basically just ended up shitty for everybody in terms of success. Javier Baez has turned into a legitimate meme. He's not a baseball player anymore. He's a meme. The Detroit Tigers are paying over $23 million a year for a meme. Chris Bryant, someone who was once looked at to be a top player in the game, maybe the best third baseman in baseball, he's done absolutely nothing with the Rockies after signing with them. His talent, I'd say, is still somewhat there. I have seen some interesting things where people think his swing might not age very well since he has that lofty swing, but he's also just been hurt like most of the time, so we haven't been able to see much of him attempt to age well regardless. Wilson Contreras is still a really good bat, but he was also hurt half of last year and isn't even a catcher anymore. The Cardinals don't have much interest in that being a thing, and he's planned to be a first baseman moving forward on a team that also doesn't look to be in a great spot right now in terms of any winning. So what the Cubs have done in recent years is try to win, but without much of a base to win, if that makes sense. They've been adding good players like Seiya Suzuki and Shota Imanaga, along with Cody Bellinger trying to get his career back on track. They've been making moves like that in hopes it will push them back to the playoffs, but overall, they're just not really built that strong, and it's shown. Like, they're not an awful team, but when you see the way the Brewers, for example, have been doing it since, ironically, 2018 when they stole the division from them, they have a pretty clear system going on, a pretty clear plan of how they want to do things and get to the playoffs. But the Cubs don't seem to be in that position. They seem more about just making moves that may help in the moment. But over time, how well will those things age, especially when you don't have the strongest team around those players? Like, Imanaga just had an awesome rookie year, for example, but the Cubs overall just were not that strong of a team, hence why they were right about 500, which is what they've been for the last 2 years. They decided to trade Cody Bellinger to the Yankees to get rid of his contract, but also brought in Kyle Tucker, which is, like I was just saying, a good move for right now, but overall, how good of a move really is that? Because Kyle Tucker only has 1 year left before he becomes a free agent. So unless the Cubs extend him or end up re-signing him in the free agency next year, trading what they did for him just to have him for 6 months doesn't seem very smart to do. Dansby Swanson is a solid player, sure, fun to watch, but he's not going to put anyone over the top or anything. His defense is great, offense not so much. Again, he's good, but let's just say this, if he's your highest paid player, that's probably not the greatest of signs. So I will say the Cubs don't look that bad coming into this season. They look like they could definitely be competitive in a division that's not very strong. but the overall outlook of this team doesn't look nearly as strong compared to the Brewers, or I would argue even maybe the Reds. Again, it is a very weak division, which I'm sure is something they're also banking on to work in their favor, but I don't know. It just doesn't seem like the Cubs front office has a set plan on how they want to do things to get themselves in the best position to win and do so consistently. But whether they win now or not, it won't be with the 2016 core, the core we thought was about to dominate baseball for a long time. It really is nuts to see not just how extreme that fall off was from the team's end and the players' end, but how quickly and unexpectedly it all happened. It's like, imagine if after the Astros lost to the Nationals in 2019, they never made the playoffs again to this day. Think about how weird and sudden that would have seemed. It makes sense that 2019 wasn't the end of the Astros winning, not nearly the end. But for the Cubs, I mean, nobody would have guessed 2018 was the end of that core being successful. But it was, and the downfall of that expected dynasty is something they're still recovering from to this day. Let me know your thoughts, and thank you for watching.